I'm absolutely pumped to introduce you to Ruth Naomi-Floyd this evening. Hello, Ruth.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Thrilled to have you on board and sharing a bit about your story. Ruth would describe herself as someone who wears many hats as an emancipatory artist and is a world-class jazz musician in her own right. And where are you from, Ruth? Where are you calling us from this evening?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so let's dive in firstly to, I suppose, your artist title, job title, emancipatory artist. Why emancipatory? What exactly does that mean?
For me, it means the courage, the strength, the integrity to tell the truth in creating, in sharing art. When I look at God, the first and greatest artist who created out of nothing, that he would bestow on his people the gift to create, that he first identifies himself not as savior of the world, not as father, but as an artist in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. And so to tell the truth about art, and when you tell the truth, it is liberating. It liberates you, but you have to have the strength and the courage to, as an artist myself, to look in the mirror and see what's looking back at me.
Was that always a calling you felt upon your life?
Yes, I was born a minister's, pastor's kid, and I guess most importantly, a missionary's kid. But my father and mother were urban missionaries before it was in vogue. So I grew up in one of the worst neighborhoods in the city where there were gang fire. I have a scar right here. I was caught in a gun battle, I think at the age of 6. But in the midst of all this chaos of gang war, of young men, black and Latino, black and brown, dying over territory that wasn't even theirs. It's kind of like a more serious version of West Side Story without the dancing and singing, but of this sense of ownership because of being marginalized, because of not seen fully as Imago Dei by Christians and the world. It also was the safest place. It's the place where I saw the greatest examples of community. So, born into what would be seen a marginalized place and space to a marginalized people, I saw some of the greatest gifts of beauty and truth in the midst of despair and ugliness and violence. So I'm so grateful for that heritage. And so running warm in my veins, of course, are the blood of my ancestors who were enslaved Africans, who were, the African prisoners of the forced labor system of American slavery. And so that fortitude, that strength to endure in the midst of what could be seen as crumbling circumstances. I've been involved since then with HIV/AIDS, mass incarceration, trans issues, and really doing the grassroots and the work, the hard work, day in day work on the ground. And because of that, I'm grateful, but I know it has to do with my parents and the heritage, and more importantly, the mission God gave them in ministry.
And within this came a liking to play, to create, to sing, to express. Where did music and faith first connect in your life then?
The same place, in our home. I grew up listening to the great soprano opera singer, my father's favorite opera singer, Leontine Price, favorite singer actually. So I had opera. We grew up listening to old gospel of Andre Crouch and Mahalia Jackson and all that. And then also grew up listening to Dvorak and Bach. We would stand in the $5 line and we'd go all the way to the balcony and listen to the Philadelphia Orchestra. And I would look around and there weren't not many people that looked like me. And, my mother would inherently always get the question like, why are you bringing your children here? It's kind of like, it's too heady, it's too dense. why would you bring kids there? Why don't you take them to a gospel concert, or why don't you take them somewhere else? And I remember just hearing the swell of this classical music that deeply, deeply impacted me. And it was kind of like, I remember thinking, this is painting beauty with sound. The same time, my father took me to my first concert, and it was Andre Crouch. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but great gospel legend in America. And he transformed what gospel would sound like and look like, in some ways the same way Kirk Franklin did and others. And I remember standing there, and my dad lifted me up on his shoulders and watching these cool, hip, white, black band, integrated band racially, using the sounds, these new sounds of electric instruments and all, glorifying God. And I thought, I had the same feeling I had at the Philadelphia Orchestra playing Dvorak as I did at Andre Crouch at a gospel concert. And so creativity was all around, and my parents were the product of the Depression of the 30s and 40s in America, and taking music lessons or creating was not an option. They each individually vowed as teenager, whoever they would marry, that their children would have a chance to learn art, and particularly music. They both loved music. And so my sisters and I each play 2 instruments and sing. I play piano. This is my first instrument was my voice, but piano, flute, and bassoon.
I noticed a few places online, actually, where in online previews of you, you've garnered this reputation for, quote, creating sacred jazz vocal settings at your shows. Why do you think the settings you create have been described as sacred?
I think because my lyrical content does speak of my faith and point to my faith in Jesus Christ, but also justice issues and surrounding those things. People in the beginning didn't know what to call it. People thought I was singing in a Black gospel way over jazz chords. That's not what I do. I am a jazz vocalist, so I'm using jazz vocal techniques, singing over jazz music, but the lyrical content is based on Jesus. I'm going to other things too. I have the Frederick Douglass Jazz Works in, one of the signature songs talks about press on. And then I'm doing another type of album that just talks about what does it mean, my own personal experience and the experience of what it means to be Black in America. I am artistically most alive on the stage with jazz musicians who are completely fluid in the language, music of jazz. If we're going to talk about the theology of jazz, I love jazz theologically because you have till the next note to correct any wrong notes. Isn't that? It is not confirmed. It's the wrong note until the next note. Yeah. I remember Miles talking about that, and some critic or someone saying, I don't understand, this passage is stunning. How did you go from this note to this one with this rhythm? And he goes, oh, it's not the deep. I hit a wrong note and I corrected it. But it was so brilliant, when you look at it through music theory and through all this stuff. And so I love jazz that because it's the gift of grace.
Just the last couple of years in the UK, it seems we've seen a bit of a resurgence once again of the jazz genre in the mainstream. And many people watching have probably heard of artists like the Ezra Collective or Tom Misch or Nubia Garcia, Jacob Collier, and festivals like Love Supreme. What is it, do you think, about the genre that gives it this enduring appeal, this neo-jazz? Why do we keep coming back to jazz?
It was birth in oppression. It was birth, not so much, the roots of the music was birth in oppression, but jazz was birth in protest. And, it connects us to today. That is the root of most American music. I so wish they were here to see that the songs that they created while picking cotton, while doing all these other things, while being raped and whipped and dehumanized, that the songs that came out of their body, out of their mouths, were the foundation that would stand the test of time, that will be the roots of almost all American music. What are you saying, Ruth? What I'm saying is, where we would have rock and roll, would we have the blues? Would we have country music? Would we have ragtime? Would we have African American gospel? Will we have gospel music, period, even white gospel? Our music and a genre, and especially jazz, we have to tell the truth, the whole truth. It is music that provides a dialogue, that provides a conversation, that is democratic. Everybody has a chance to say what they want to say. Everybody gets a chance to speak, and then they come back as a unit. And it's powerful. It's fluid. It's creativity. It's improvisational. And I think those profound elements historically, and then just the nature elements of the music, is something that I think people come back to all the time.
Could you describe to us what it's like to be in the atmosphere in Philadelphia right now?
This has been a long-standing issue, all the way back to when lynching was illegal to do. And it's a different type of lynching. So it's gritty right now. There's a lot of tension. Yesterday I was coming home and I saw 100 car procession for one candidate, and the way they were behaving and yelling, I looked around at other people and they were scared. And I heard one woman say, I don't even know if I should go to the polls tomorrow. If they're going to be there, I'm scared. So Philly's a gritty town. We endure, given by our sports. We are passionate. We speak our minds. And so all of that is all kind of coming together. There's a sense of, someone said, oh, I'll be glad when this is over. And I said, oh, my dear, the voting will be over, but it's not over. Regardless of who wins, there'll be unrest. And I would say that across America, that there will be tensions and acts of rage, acts of sadness, acts of revenge.
You mentioned rage. I guess some people feel very powerless and yet ache to see peace. Others, as you said, feel very enraged. And it would seem both on this side of the Atlantic, but on your side, believe anarchy is just simply necessary to achieve peace and justice in the long run. What are we to do with our anger? Does the God of the Bible have anything more to offer beyond the reactions we feel and see around us right now?
Absolutely. Everyone uses Jesus was mad when he went in a temple where they were casting lots and gambling. To really study that passage, Jesus premeditated. It was an emotional reaction. He took his time. The Jewish scholar told me, my friend said, that there were probably other leather whips around, but he took the time to create one and to tie them tightly, giving those that were sinning a chance to stop. And so we see Jesus in righteous anger, not emotionally kind of out of control rage, but in justified anger. And so throughout the Bible, from Genesis to Revelations, we see Jeremiah with his rage. We see the minor prophets with their rage. We see Judges where God is straight up gangster, boom, but the question is it controlled rage, and is it righteous rage? And are we equally enraged by our own acts of violence? So I'm not a violence, I'm not convicted murderer. No, the acts of violence of not telling the truth, the acts of violence that is created when we don't look at our brothers and sisters as equal. He also tells us what to do with our anger and rage, looking through Proverbs. But it doesn't mean to sit in a corner and not speak. It means to be very much like Jeremiah, still speaking the truth, but with an indignant rage, and a righteous rage that's towards goodness, that points us back to our Father.
It's really powerful. Wow. Have you felt, I guess, recently any particular experiences where you felt prejudice because of the color of your skin?
The great writer James Baldwin stated that we have to know twice as more. I have to know twice as much about you than you need to know about me. And why is that? Because when we look at America, who is in power are white males. So I have to know more about you because I have to know how to navigate. So we have to know more. I don't remember a time where I was in white space where I didn't feel that tension of racism. Was it loving relationship, a community? Yes, but I was always keenly aware that I was Black. A poet said, the torture of being the unseen object and the constantly observed subject. So going back to having experienced racism, that's my experience of always being the unseen person in the room, if you will. But also constantly being observed as a subject. What is she doing? Why is she here? What's going on? I remember the first time I didn't feel it. It was the first time I went to France, and I was standing on a corner in Paris. And what was clear, and I'm not saying that France doesn't have its racial issues, I want to be very clear here. But for that moment, American who grew up with such in a nation where racism is embedded in its history, the first place I felt that my skin color did not matter as much other than Black spaces was on a corner in France, in Paris, when I got out of the taxi. And what was clear without anyone saying one word to me was whether I was French or not. And I wept, and I wept. And I am not a victim. I think you can sense that from me. I'm not into martyrdom. I'm not into crying, woe is me, but I am into telling the truth, and I've lived long enough to see it. I've been in so many spaces, Black, brown, and white. And the spaces that have hurt me the most racially have by far been white, evangelical, white Christian spaces. In America. Yeah. In America.
I guess then for many people listening in who aren't religious, and they hear of this pernicious, subtle racism that creeps its way into the white evangelical church in the West, specifically the States, by the sounds of things, what motivation should they have to look into the Jesus of the Bible if these are some of the fruits of that religion? What's going on here?
The West has made Jesus into who they are in power. You see blonde and blue-eyed Jesus. You see him as presented as white. You see whiteness as normal. But why did Jesus decide to come when he did? And where did he decide to come? He shows himself in human form as a Palestinian Jew who then has to what? Escape with his parents from oppression. How did he help overthrow the Roman Empire? I grew up in an era, I don't know if you guys know Rambo, and for me, the Garden of Gethsemane is a Rambo moment. This is a time for him to stand up, to, defy the Roman Empire and sit on the throne. And instead he's asking, is there another way? He shows us his transparency. He shows us the art of struggle. He shows us that it's okay to struggle and that we will. But then he gets up and follows what he has to do. And so I think in each of our hearts, we have to decide, will we follow Jesus or will we follow his followers? He did not say, take up your cross and follow me and my followers. He said, follow me. And Jesus is a perfect example of living in that tension. To Jesus, look at his story, look at his words, look what did he have to say, what he didn't say, how he told the truth in story form, in a gentle way, in a very tough way. how he answered a question with another question, and follow him.
What would you recommend in terms of our posture and actions we should do to enable people that would traditionally feel out of place to be seen and heard?
I would say, listen. And although the reality, I can only speak for America, right? In some ways, or I'm choosing to only speak in America right now. It's to, there's some practical things. Have a worldview, understand history, but also in these times, sit and listen, whether you agree or not. The point isn't whether you think it's the truth. It's the person's experience. Listen to them. And to understand there's Black people aren't monolithic. Black and brown people, there's many diverse voices within those communities. Listen to them and to understand and to really think through, what does power do? All truth is God's truth. And so, to be more specific for Christians, my white Christians and brothers and sisters, look for the hypocrisy. We see that there's Christians, most will say, Fraud had something to say that was truthful. Now, we don't embrace all of what he said, of course not. But we're able to somehow work through the nuances of what Freud says and of what other thinkers says. And for instance, we're able to think through certain other mantras and organizations, and if you will, eat the meat and spit out the bones. But when it comes to BLM, we can't. All of it is poisonous. We can't go through the nuances. We're not unwilling to do the work. Well, this I don't agree with. This goes against my faith, but this part is true. So we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Where when you look historically, white evangelicals have been able to have this gift to work through the nuances. And then we're not even able to say what is true. We're not able to separate, if you will, the line of the statement, Black Lives Matter. Well, clearly, all lives matter, clearly. But we're talking about Black lives right now. Not all lives have been marginalized. Not all lives have been oppressed from the beginning, from 1619, from really 1492. All right? So we're talking about those right now. We're not even able to separate that from the organization. More importantly than even that, in some ways, is why is there even a need for BLM in this moment?
Wow.
If the American church was doing its job, there would be no need for it. So it's one thing to stand and criticize this movement, and there's a lot to criticize. It's another thing to take ownership and responsibility of why this organization is needed and why it appeals worldwide to so many people. There was a part of me that mourned when Martin Luther King Jr. became a holiday, because I knew he was being sanitized and romanticized by white power. To be blunt, and this is part of being an emancipatory artist, everyone loves a Negro with a dream. But did you listen to the other parts of I Have a Dream speech? Martin Luther King was not assassinated because he had a dream. He was assassinated because he started dealing with economic justice. He started dealing with other layers of justice. And so I have to go back to truth. And there has to be restorative action. That's where the church stops. And quite frankly, that's where the world stops. We can cry, we can say we're sorry, we can have sorry day, we can invite different people over to our house, we can make them godparents, they can be in our wedding, we can say I love you, we can sing a song with them, we can hold hands and have kumbaya and cry tears. But in my experience, and I'm just telling the truth, to have sat with some white evangelicals and who have wept with me on Friday, those same tears are weaponized against me on Monday. So What it would look like, I would say it would look like what heaven looks like. And the African American spirituals talk about this. They talk about physical liberation on earth and then also spiritual liberation when they get to heaven. Mm. So I'm not talking about, let's just put this aside. One day we will hold hands and sing in a powerful way before our Lord, and that'll be a great day, and let's hope for that. Yes, amen. But the Lord's Prayer says, on earth as it is in heaven. We should be actively trying to do that. What it would look like is that there's no BLM, that we can disagree to agree as long as it doesn't dehumanize one another, that we can sit and passionately disagree and then be able to get up and say, you have respect and see me as equal, you are my brother, and stand firm in our convictions, that we wouldn't dehumanize each other. That's what it would look like. And the world is longing to see that.
Those looking in to the Christian faith would still hear of this long lineage of a resistance to look in the mirror and then look back to Jesus and feel perplexed at his followers not looking like him, but more to the point, would maybe think, oh, just Ruth, you are articulating how I feel. I long for this picture of harmony and togetherness, and yet I just don't see how a man from over 2,000 years ago, despite the influence he's wrought through many a culture, could be looked back to provide that kind of answer. So why look back to Jesus? Why not put our hope in a new paradigm?
Because it's not lasting. History's told us that. What is history? The patterns of human behavior. It's not lasting. And 19 years old, I wanted to be really clear that I wasn't following the coattails or riding the coattails of my parents. And I took some time to really study 5 other religions, and I mean really deeply study them. Talk to their leaders, talk to their religious leaders, talk to faithful followers who believed them, that was willing to die for what they believe. And you know what I came back with? Nietzsche says, I cannot serve a God who doesn't dance. And I'm really glad our God dances. But I cannot serve a God who has not suffered. I cannot serve a God who doesn't understand despair. I cannot serve a God who doesn't live in the tensions. I do not understand a God who has not suffered. And so the hope and the reason why I beg you to look at Jesus, and particularly the cross. If you want to dive into the tensions of the day, look at the cross where beauty and violence collided, where joy and sorrow, where the greatest blues singer, and I love Ma Rainey, but the greatest blues singer, Jesus, sings the greatest blues line ever uttered. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? That's tension. And in those tensions, then he says to his followers, it's not going to be rosy. It's not going to be peace. There's not going to be skipping down the lane tomorrow with a cup of tea to the election poll. There's going to be ugliness, but take up cross and follow me. I promise you, I've shown you, I promise you that that is the way of peace. You will not be without turmoil. You will not be without grief. You will not be without the blues. But I became the blues. I lived in the tension. I died in the tension. I showed you what struggle looks like. I showed you what transparency looks like. And then I overcame it. That's straight up gangster. Then I overcame it. Why not me? I'm the only one who has defeated it. Even in death, there is the hope of life everlasting. I can't serve a God who doesn't understand that. I won't. And I'm so grateful I don't have to. We are not reaching for God. God reaches for us in the midst of turmoil and grief and destruction and uncertainty and loss and sorrow. He reaches for us. He continually reaches for us because he understands it and conquered it. Why not follow him? Why not? And as Bessie Smith says, the greatest blues singer never stops singing. Jesus didn't stop singing because of that. He didn't stop singing when he sang the last line of that blues line song, "It is finished." But he keeps singing. He sings over his joy because he is the hope. And he sings over his joy because if we can experience that, if we can work towards, if we can be part of his body, of his community of followers that brings forth some light, some hope in the midst of these times, then we have a right one day to experience that forevermore. Life without that tension. Life where there is joy, unspeakable joy. You cannot understand the darkness, the joy, cannot understand the joy of Resurrection Sunday without the darkness of Friday. And that's where the Christian lives. That's what it means to pick up your cross and follow. I'd rather be with them than without them.